All right. So here we are. Very excited to be here with everyone on behalf of myself and my partner in crime, my co-PI, John Davis. He seems to be having a bit of trouble with audio. So we're just going to move right along. Okay. So real-world data and real-world evidence in neonatology. How are we going to approach this? Before we do that, I want to take the opportunity to level set and walk you through how the majority of the other public-private partnerships work at CPAD, and how Kanwaljit and John and myself are committed to ensuring that Inc. joins the club of public-private partnerships that deal with the integration of data and the generation of actionable solutions for drug development based on data.
Yeah.
So in other words, is that John?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Excellent. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Sarah.
So the transformation of data into actionable knowledge that can help expedite drug development is the mantra here. And so just to walk through a little bit of a history, CPAD was founded back in 2005 based on the Critical Path Initiative document from the FDA. And I'm a space buff, full confession here. And so I draw the analogy between the Critical Path Initiative document from the FDA to the Kennedy speech that rallied up the nation to go to the moon. The 2004 paper from the FDA is the document that rallied us to set up the Critical Path Institute and go to the moon in the sense of being able to integrate data and transform the data into actionable knowledge. So in summary, what is it that the public-private partnerships at CPAD do? We generate the legal infrastructure, the scientific infrastructure, and the regulatory infrastructure to generate this unique, neutral, non-competitive environment for you guys in the companies to be able to come to the table together with the regulators, the patient groups, and other government agencies, as well as the academics, and come to this neutral environment that we provide and share information that you guys would not be able to share otherwise. A lot of times that information takes the form of patient-level data from clinical trials, observational studies, patient registries, and now Inc. is at the bleeding edge in supporting the agency's vision of really having a robust understanding of how to employ real-world data and turn the real-world data into real-world evidence that becomes actionable for drug development. And so this is tremendously exciting. And so these are all the public-private partnership or consortia that we coordinate. You see Inc. right in the center, and that it's appropriate that Inc. is right in the center because it deals with accelerating drug development at the beginning of life. And that is a pretty compelling value proposition. If you draw a diagonal line starting at the bottom left, you see the Data Collaboration Center. That's what that group is the group that will allow us to be able to integrate all the patient-level data that we're aiming for to integrate in neonatology, and be able to organize the data in such a way that we can then turn the data into actionable solutions. If you continue the diagonal line all the way to the top right, you see the quantitative medicine program right there. That's the program that I helped create. It's now in very capable hands with Jackson Burton after I took the role of Chief Science Officer for CPAD. And that is the team that will have the back of Inc. And that's the team that is going to help transform the data that the Data Collaboration Center is going to help us integrate into the actionable solutions based on real-world data. Now, none of what we do happens in a vacuum. You guys, as the clinical experts and the drug development experts in neonatology, will be part of the journey every step of the way. But you have a village of scientists and committed professionals to ensure that things are happening. This slide shows you a snapshot of our ability to integrate patient-level data. By the end of this year, we are going to approach 140,000 patients across the indications that you see on the right. We want Inc. and neonatology to be a hefty chunk of the evolution of this graph. And we want to ensure that Inc., as I said, joins the club with these other therapeutic areas that have had the chance of integrating data and turn the data into actionable solutions that have helped transform the drug development space in each one of those areas. But how do we do that? And so the Data Collaboration Center at CPAD is, like I said, that group that deals with everything pertaining to the integration of data, the acquisition of those databases, and the integration of those data sources into standardized databases. There are a couple of terms that you're going to hear quite a bit from this day forward. And I want to make sure that I spend a little bit of time explaining those. There's the concept of a data lake, and then there's the concept of a data warehouse. Because we're dealing with real-world data and the murkiness of those data, and this is not an indictment of those data, it's just the reality of how real-world data present themselves in this day and age. There is a way to integrate those data in such a way where the structure is not as prescribed, and that's the concept of a data lake. But then from a data lake, you could turn the data with further standardization into a data warehouse where everything is structured in a regulatory grade way. And the ability to handle the data that way is what allows the Data Collaboration Center to interact with the Quantitative Medicine Program and you, the scientists that collaborate through the PPPs, to generate the actionable solutions for drug development that we are known for. And I cannot wait to get going with this effort in neonatology. The majority of those actionable drug development tools will take the form of quantitative platforms that allow you to understand the source of variability. And so the previous presentation, you talked like a quantitative medicine expert. It's all about the identification and the quantification of sources of variability. That's the name of the game. And that's what we want to get to with neonates. In addition to that, we plan to, for the real-world data platform that we're going to generate, to establish a series of interfaces that will also help researchers get oriented with the data. That's the first level of the interface. The second level of the interface is an interface that will allow the researchers to build their own analysis subsets. And the third level of interface is one that would allow the researchers to run the analytics locally within the platform. These are the visionary dreams that we have for what the real-world data platform can become, with, of course, the pilot projects that we have set out to do in neonates. And so in the next 5 years, the vision is that we're going to solidify the current collaborations that we have with you guys in the neonatology field, but also expand those with additional partners and additional players to really strengthen the biotechnology and drug development and medical product development ecosystem in neonatology. In addition, I firmly believe that Inc. is going to get to the top in that list of therapeutic areas that will integrate data and that will transform those data into solutions to optimize medical product development. And of course, this is all about our patients. And playing a major role in transforming medical product development for neonates and really improve their lives. In the video, there was a comment about endpoints. I could not agree more. But if we are going to understand those endpoints, back to the previous comments, we need to identify and quantify the source of variability for the different subpopulations that behave in a certain manner with those endpoints, and how to understand the optimization of those endpoints for their use in drug development. That's what I had for today. So John, I'll pass it on to you. Hopefully you resolved the audio issues you were having.
Yes, thanks, Klaus.
Awesome.
And hopefully everyone can hear me okay now. But I think we really want people to appreciate the incredible opportunity that we've been given to really have Inc. leverage the data science expertise at CPAD, and Klaus has discussed those, and integrate that into the clinical models that we work on every day. So Inc., you heard about the history. Everyone here knows about this history. It was really the brainchild of Susie McCune, who was working with Janet Woodcock. And you can see Janet's quote over on the left side of the slide. I'm not going to go into it in detail now for the interest of time. But we really are all focusing on the issues that really affect babies in our newborn intensive care unit every day. You can see a number of the working groups that we developed initially, and we've made significant progress, as you've heard from our working groups, in all these areas. And Inc. really reflects a terrific public-private partnership, getting all the key stakeholders to the table. But really, drug development for neonates has been pushed by regulation and the regulators. And that's something that we are eternally grateful for. With respect to neonatal drug development, we all recognize that it's really quite limited. I'm always amazed that the last drug that significantly improved survival in premature neonates, which was pulmonary surfactant, was approved by the FDA in 1991. So in the 30 years since, we really have not had any specific drugs approved in the premature neonatal population, despite the fact that the March of Dimes says we spend approximately $29 billion a year on prematurity. When you look at clinical trial activity in neonates, it's less than 1% of all trials on clinicaltrials.gov. There's a really high rate of off-label drug usage in the NICU, more than 60, some say as high as 90%. And when we look at all the areas that we need to build on and work on, most common laboratory values are not defined in neonates. It really limits their utility for drug development. How do you report an adverse event based on a laboratory finding when we don't know all the laboratory normals? And we go from 22 weeks gestation and sometimes 380 to 400 grams to 42 weeks gestation, can be almost as much as 5,000 grams. Bob Ward's continuously reinforcing the fact that physiology changes dramatically over that time frame, both in utero and extrauterine. So there's really a critical need to define normal laboratory value reference ranges for the neonatal population. With respect to bronchopulmonary dysplasia, it's a chronic lung disease in premature infants. It is really a multifactorial problem, but certainly we know that treatment with oxygen and mechanical ventilation plays an important role. Since there's really no oxygen in the lungs in utero, even room air is supraphysiologic oxygen concentrations and can cause injury. It's associated with significant morbidity, mortality, long-term adverse respiratory and neurodevelopmental outcomes, such as asthma, repeated respiratory infections, cognitive delays. And what's amazing is the incidence of BPD continues to increase despite numerous advances in respiratory care practices. It is the only complication of neonatal intensive care that continues to increase. And what I want you to see from this slide, it's a busy slide, and I'm not going to have time to go through all of it, but the risk factors for developing BPD, you can see with respect to prenatal events like intrauterine growth restrictions, cigarette smoking on the mothers, a variety of postnatal events, such as infection or ventilator-induced lung injury, oxygen, nutritional problems. There's genetic and epigenetic factors. And all of this really affects, as Jerry Beer likes to tell me, the endotypes and the variety of different phenotypes and endotypes of BPD. So it's a very heterogeneous problem, and we really have not been very successful addressing it. So there's really unmet needs in BPD. We've counted up to 18 different definitions based on the use of oxygen or not, invasive and non-invasive respiratory support, a variety of time points, either while the babies are in the NICU or when they go home, following them up to a year of age. All these different definitions lead to different rates of BPD and different outcomes. The short-term endpoints related to disease severity may not necessarily correlate with long-term outcomes, and most drug studies enroll a large number of premature neonates based purely on birth weight or gestational age and the need for respiratory support. So we need to do better. Many studies to prevent BPD have been unsuccessful due to a limited understanding of the disease process itself, BPD dynamics over time. So there is an urgent need to identify risk factors to enrich that population being studied and develop a more comprehensive disease progression model of BPD. And here's when you look at it, and this is from Robin Steinhorn's paper that we published from Inc., and it gives you the windows of opportunity and relevant outcomes. So you can look at the prenatal events, you can look at postnatal events, you can look at it at 36 weeks or 40 weeks post-menstrual age, you can look at it a year of age, and look at a variety of factors and even longer. So it really is quite complicated a process, but we think now for the first time when we use these two case studies of really important factors in the grant, and I'm delighted that it was funded. It allows us to work with CPAD. The leadership team from Inc. has tried for many, many years to get us sufficient funding and the opportunity to look at these large data sources to answer these really, really very important questions that all of our key stakeholders, and in particular, our parents and our families, they're depending upon us to make progress here. And we think we finally have the opportunity, if we can build a 250, 500,000, or even 1 million patient database, we're going to be able to ask these questions and find the answers. So I think I'll stop here, Klaus, and turn it back to you.
Thanks, John. That was a great overview. So Ken, will you give me the word? Do we move on to the next step of the agenda, or do we take questions?
No, you go through these next slides.
Klaus just finished this presentation? Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Can do that. Okay. So the real-world data and analytics platform for bronchopulmonary dysplasia and neonatal values. So what is it that we really want to do? So we want to integrate multiple types of data with a focus, of course, on electronic medical records, but not just focus on that. And we want to really have an understanding of the characterization of the ranges in commonly used lab values in the NICU, with the understanding that one of the key sources of variability is going to be the evolving physiology of those babies in a daily fashion. Then we want to take the information longitudinally for those individuals that have been hospitalized in the NICU with BPD, and start looking at developing a quantitative model for how the BPD measures progress over time. And of course, we need to harmonize the definition of BPD based on the underlying data, not so much the actual flags that will come in the data, but the underlying pieces of information that we can use to harmonize a definition of BPD across data sets and start looking at the longitudinal dynamics of the condition. But in the journey of doing that, we are going to have to diagnose the data. And that's going to really give us a way to establish a learn and confirm paradigm for the quality of the data and really diagnosing if the data can support the kinds of analyses that we're proposing. If the answer is not great and some of the data can't really support the kinds of answers that we're seeking, that is okay, because then learn and confirm paradigm, we will have a clear diagnosis for you researchers in the field as to what kinds of gaps need to be filled in terms of the data. And that is something that the agency cares about deeply. And so that's going to be a component of the value proposition of the effort. And then the improvements of the real world data outlook for neonatology for the future. That's going to be the key component of this. Okay, the integration of the data will give us a series of benefits. We're going to work on interoperability solutions, and that is going to benefit you guys in the field, not just in terms of optimizing your own data platforms, but also become more competitive for your own funding strategies. Of course, the generation of solutions is one that we care deeply about at CPAD. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we think that Inc. is going to join a very exclusive club and have a tremendous amount of impact. And then this is going to provide a myriad of lessons that we can then expand to many other unmet needs in neonatology. I'm resonating a lot with the presentation about blood pressure. That is something that is definitely one that would be of interest and would be a perfect fit for an effort like this one. So how do we build the real world data analytics platform? You heard me present on the Data Collaboration Center, the notion of the structuring of the data. Let me emphasize that one more time. With real world data, because of the nature those data come with, we may start with the concept of a data lake for their interoperability and integration. But then from there, we can definitely move on into a data warehouse if the data allow themselves to be put in that structure. That's going to be part of a key diagnosis that is going to be run. And then with the support from the Quantitative Medicine Program and you guys, the collaborators of Inc., at the end of the day, this is your consortium, the journey to generate those actionable drug development solutions that we just talked about. And so the participants and collaborators that have committed data so far and that remain our top list of potential data contributors are listed on the slide. Thank you so much. This is going to be, and this is global, by the way, this is going to be a journey. We're going to learn a lot of things together. We're going to make things happen together. And at the end of the day, everyone's going to emerge stronger at the other end through the journey and the efforts. And so thank you very much. This is not an extensive list, but at the end of the day, this is a collaborative effort, and it is thanks to you, the partners and the collaborators that allow this to happen. And of course, the agency deserves a ton of credit for believing in this proposal and funding it. And of course, we are absolutely committed to making things happen and ensuring the success of this effort. The kind of lab value data that we want to look at is listed on this slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading through every single one of those values, but this is what we're going to be looking at. And then in terms of the BPD data, this is what we're looking at for now. But of course, these lists are going to be refined as we start looking at, number one, the metadata from the different data sources, and then the actual patient level data from the different data sources. And so stay tuned for a continuous learn and confirm wheel that is going to start happening. And as I said, you're going to hear terms like decision science, quantitative medicine, data lakes, data warehouses, but don't get scared. We're going to make sure that everyone is on board with the terminology and the practical solutions that we want to develop out of this effort. And so with that, I think this presentation concludes, and I'll pass it on to Thomas and Colin for the next presentation. Thanks so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Tom Miller. I'm the Global Head of Pediatric Development at Bayer. And I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Colin Hovinga, the Senior Vice President in Clinical and Scientific Development for IACT. And today we're going to give you both the industry and the network perspective on the use of real-world data to create real-world evidence for use in neonatal clinical trials. So, representing industry colleagues today, the perspectives that I wanted to share were a few-fold. First and foremost, I wanted to share some perspective on recent developments and approaches toward use of real-world data / evidence at life science companies, how we think about that today. Specifically, how we think about employing these important tools in our pediatric clinical trials. Share some thoughts with respect to potential new directions, and highlight the importance of data sharing. When we transition to Colin, he'll provide some perspective on IACT and the importance of networks in a broad sense, but also provide some perspective on how they help in our ecosystem use of real-world data / evidence into practice. So much has changed on this front broadly in large pharmaceutical companies around the globe on the real-world data and evidence topic in recent years. And now many, if not most companies, have dedicated real-world data line functions where there are expert data scientists to help project teams understand option space with respect to alternative study design. The utility of real-world data and evidence spans the entire molecule life cycle, from early research rationalization and molecule design through end of life cycle for very important tasks, including pharmacovigilance and safety surveillance. Use of real-world data and related approaches can also be useful in strategy development for a pediatric clinical trial design and, very importantly, accelerated execution of said study. So there are a number of places and circumstances within the development sphere where we consider using data as a matter of standard business practice today, at least at Bayer. I think real-world data play a very important role in study feasibility, specifically handicapping patient availability regionally and globally. So we have more of a data-driven sense of how feasible the conduct of the overall trial is. But it could also be utilized as a strategic tool at the center level to ensure that centers that are likely to be productive are included in the trial network. Inclusion/exclusion criteria and study population enrichment. This I think is very important. Oftentimes, as we've discussed now as a primary topic at IMC for some time, while a disease may have a clear and historically relevant definition, it may be the case that many endotypes of that disease exist in the population, and ensuring that we're going to get patients enrolled in the study that are most likely to respond to study medication is of paramount importance. And then finally, and perhaps most progressively, we can use real-world data as it relates to the actual design and conduct of the study. For example, employing synthetic control arms as a means of assessing without compromise from a data integrity and quality perspective. I think as we think about tomorrow and where we can go, there is an opportunity to improve our understanding of many topics by use of this very large and robust new data source. As both Klaus and John highlighted a few moments ago, we are very interested within INC in establishing normative laboratory values as a function of both gestational and postnatal age for infants. This is, I think, an incredibly important topic, and one that I think will have a significant impact on the field, as today there are many gaps in our understanding of what normal means for the young fragile patients that we bring in our studies. I think it will also help us inform safety profile understanding of medications, as this audience certainly appreciates. These preterm infants typically have multiple complications of prematurity simultaneously, and there are very likely expected event rates associated with these comorbidities that should be accounted for as we contemplate whether an adverse event is related to study drug or not. These data can be useful in helping us establish natural history studies to serve as control populations for future studies. And as I mentioned, that I would touch on in a moment, we can access these data sets by leveraging large aggregation of disparate data sets through data sharing, which is becoming an increasingly important approach in many fields, including this one. We have a data sharing initiative underway as part of the grant initiative that we referenced a bit earlier in the conversation, because there are several sponsored studies that enroll preterm infants across the entirety of our life science company ecosystem. These studies may be indication-seeking studies where the primary objective is to enroll neonates. These data can come from obligatory studies that we may have across various jurisdictions in the world, for example, through pediatric investigational plans with PEDCO, or these data can come from phase 4 or investigator-initiated studies. And while no one study may have a vast amount of data, if we think about leveraging the entirety of our ecosystem and all of the studies, we can create a database that may have several 100,000, if not more, lives. Sponsored studies that can come from companies typically have very good quality control of data, and I think we do a very good job producing very reliable data. So would urge company participants listening to our talk today to give this some thought and what might be possible. From a practical consideration, however, as you think about participating in our data sharing initiative, data privacy rules vary considerably around the world, and I suspect company policies will differ from company to company. So I would suggest that as you think about the prospect of data sharing for initiatives like this or others, that you plan accordingly with lead time to make sure that the necessary partners within your organization have time to do their piece as well. And with that, I would like to hand over to Colin to share some network-specific perspectives. Colin?
Thank you, Tom. My role in this session is really to relay the network or the site investigator / academic investigator perspective. First of all, I want to mention a little bit about IAC for Children for those of you who don't know about this organization. One of the things that has been appreciated by multiple sources is the challenge of pediatric drug development. IAC was formed as an independent organization to foster the development of devices and medicines to be available in the public health perspective, and really to serve as an advocate and an effort in this space. So we're a public-private partnership that serves in that capacity. One of the things we strive to do, and we fully support this partnership with INC and Critical Path, is the innovation. We work with sponsors like Tom's Miller's company to design better trials and use a variety of resources to do that, including real-world data. One of the significant challenges in raising real-world data is that in many cases there are holes or gaps, or there's challenges in actually accessing real-world data. So we believe that this project will greatly advance the way we do neonatal medication research. The other thing we do is we have really positive relationships with our sites. We have a learning network, central IRB, lots of machinery to help expedite the enrollment of studies once they're designed and ready to go. Next slide. This I'm not going to go in great detail. This just gives you the multiple aspects that we engage. Strategy and planning. We're going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure. We do things with education and standardization of processes. We have an ISMB, an IRB, et cetera, but as well as thought leadership and working to multi-stakeholder meetings and to work with collaborations to drive pediatric initiatives forward. Next slide. Now, this is one I want to pause a little bit about and discussing IACS for Children's Network. We have a fairly diverse geographically network of sites. This continues to expand. At the time of this presentation, we have 78 network sites. We have interoperability with Europe, Canada, and soon Japan. We have a dedicated contact at each of the sites. So we have a long-standing relationship. Sites are pre-qualified, so they meet standards for them being research savvy and capable. We have a lot of different initiatives to further develop the sites, a central IRB, and other things that really work on mentoring and fostering the sites. And that hope that this project will bring is that this will serve both the academic person's needs, the sponsor's needs, as well as the regulatory needs. Next slide. Now, why is this project important for someone at a network site? Having worked with real-world data in a lot of different vendors, like I had mentioned earlier, there's significant challenges working with neonatal data sets. There really isn't a comparable data set that's out there that you can tap into through commercial data sources. There's some registries and other things, but nothing nearly as vast and as detailed as what we'll be planning in this project. Knowledge generation, I think that just as Tom had mentioned, understanding the natural variation in common laboratories is really important for researchers and clinicians so that they can understand what is in an abnormal lab in a neonatal population and how does development and gestational age come into play. And so interventions can be judged effectively. It provides clinical information for understanding outcomes in natural history studies, as well as academic pursuits. I think that most clinicians that are investigators have, they'll be looking forward to seeing the data come out of this project and then to build on it in their own research projects and whatnot. I think lastly, part of along our mission, for use in study design and feasibility determinations, and hopefully in the longer term that it will be used to study and used in planning for an approval for new study medications in neonates. Next slide. Now, I think one of the things when someone undertakes such a vast project as this, I think that one always question, is this doable? I think that, one of the things that we did early on in trying to establish the feasibility of this project was a site survey to determine interest. As you recall earlier, we had 70-some slides on 70-some sites in the initial network discussion. 52 sites were surveyed, and this was largely out of the site's request during the peak times of COVID. Many sites' research departments had been shut down or inoperable when we did this survey, and so 52 sites said that they were considering projects and whatnot. 32 sites amongst that, it's a little over half expressed interest, which is quite vast given our return on similar surveys was quite low. We felt this was really in favor of interest from sites and their involvement. We actually had 2 international sites expressed interest as well. Now, I think when we look at the number of patients that this has potential to reach, I tried to put some statistics here, because, talking about sample size and how generalizable a project like this might be, Sites varied greatly on the number of neonates that they treated heavily. Most of them were 1,000 to 5,000 per year. That may seem even small for those of you who do adult research, but that's quite a large number when it comes to the pediatric patients. If you multiply that times, say, 5 years, times 10 years, you can see the numbers of patients potentially they'll be housed in this data set. So a significant number of patients that we can do a lot, very, very impactful projects. Many of the sites had neonatal follow-up programs, which would prevent longitudinal type outcome studies. Many of them have birthing centers, so things around the perinatal window, conditions that might be important would be able to be studied. And then if you look at the number of births, it's at each of these sites, it's also very, very high. So again, it opens up a very large population that's underrepresented in current real-world data sources. Next slide. Now, going back to the second part of feasibility, will people sign up? As I mentioned earlier, surprisingly, we did have a large number of sites during the middle of the COVID pandemic suggest that they were interested, involved in this project. We've had follow-up discussions, and people seem to be very, very interested in this. So we will ride the momentum in continuing to reach out and onboard sites for this initiative. Now, one of the reasons I mentioned the relationships of the organization is that, we have the capability to work with dedicated points of contacts and senior leadership in hospitals that are within the research institute at the organizations. We'll have stakeholder representation at the sites, including counsel, neonatologists, to really talk about and address questions. We hope to continue to foster collaborations with sites and shared sort of having multiple sites on conversations at a time. And then we'll also be, as their network has expanded and some sites have been more active in research now with COVID being more, I guess, adaptation, that we can reach out to more sites and whatnot than originally responded to the survey. We'll continue to collaborate with Inc. and Critical Path to I guess, market and to participate and develop materials and manuscripts that will help highlight this. And I think that those partnerships and speaking the different languages of the different community members through the academic or the research or discussions will definitely help foster and collaborations and promote the activity. With that, I'm going to close the presentation, and I want to thank everyone for listening to our section. If you have questions about this or being involved or whatnot with this project, I would send you to Critical Path Institute or Inc. to address those, and I'm sure they will be happy to help with you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. So at this point, I'm sure you might have plenty of questions in the form of that this is too complex, this is too complicated, this can never be accomplished, and there are just too many hurdles. And just to reinforce this concept, I'm actually going to introduce a couple of my colleagues from Critical Path Institute. I'm going to start with my friend and colleague from Critical Path for Alzheimer's disease, Sudhir Sivakumaran, who is going to present everything that they have accomplished as a result of their data sharing activities and all the great things that they have done. So I'm going to invite Sudhir to the stage, and he's going to give a brief presentation on CPAD, and then subsequently Diane Stephenson from Critical Path from Parkinson's is going to come over and present everything that their consortia has accomplished as a result of their data sharing. So Sudhir, you're up next.
Thank you very much, Kanwaljit. Yeah, I'm happy to share some information on the Industry Data Sharing Initiative, which is being pioneered by the Alzheimer's disease and the Parkinson's Consortium over the last few years. So in the next series of slides, we'll give you some case examples and some successes of what we have done with the Industry Data Sharing Initiative. And just for a brief context, as you all might have heard by now, everything that is being done in the Critical Path Institute is driven by patient-level data. patient-level data that is shared by the industry members and the generous contributions we receive from the industry members. And we are truly grateful and thankful to all the industry members who have shared the data with us. And this also includes academicians and other observational study data sets, which everyone has shared. So data sharing is extremely crucial for our understanding of disease progression and for our continued evolution of the novel quantitative tools that we develop at the Critical Path Institute. So we will have a brief overview of the CPAD successes, and then we'll get into the specific activities that have been going on in the Alzheimer's disease and the Parkinson's Consortium. So the Critical Path Institute has many different consortia and programs in multiple different disease areas and therapeutic areas. And two of the most prominent ones are the Alzheimer's disease and the Parkinson's Consortium, which happened to be also one of the oldest consortium of the Critical Path Institute. It was formerly called CAMD, the Coalition Against Major Diseases, which was in fact led by Diane Stevenson, who's now leading the Parkinson's Consortium. So a couple of years ago, we decided to split the Coalition Against Major Diseases into individual consortia because of the amount of work that needs to be done in a specific disease space, though the work we do is translational and it's applicable across multiple different consortia. And throughout these programs and consortia at CPAD over the last 15 years, we have achieved multiple different regulatory successes. And as you can see here in the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, we have the FDA and EMA endorsed Alzheimer's disease clinical trial simulation tools, which are publicly available for everyone to use right now. And we have also qualified a model-based Alzheimer's disease biomarker from the EMA. And this is in addition to the FDA and EMA letters of support for model-based biomarker and pre-dementia clinical trial simulator, which actually uses hippocampal volume as a prognostic marker. And in the Parkinson's disease space, we have had multiple different letters of supports and successes with the regulatory agencies. We have the PD imaging biomarker, and then also the EMA qualified model-based PD imaging biomarker, which Diane will speak about it in a while. So I will start with the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium with a brief overview on the consortium structure, how we do what we do, who are the people who are involved, because that's the key. The consortiums are driven by the stakeholders, both the internal stakeholders and the generous support, partnership, and contribution from the industry members, academic agencies, and the regulatory agencies as well. So as you can see in the slide, the Critical Path for Alzheimer's Disease Consortium has multiple different stakeholders. So it's driven by the executive director and the industry co-director who define the strategic goals and objectives for the consortium on an annual basis. But these are all defined based on the input and the feedback we get from all the members, which form the coordinating committee. And as you can see on the left, we have multiple different industry members, government and regulatory agencies, and also other nonprofit research organizations. So within this coordinating committee, we developed the strategic initiatives and the goals. We define the kind of quantitative tools and solutions that needs to be developed. And the most critical aspect is all of this are driven and targeted towards a particular question, or the question of the industry members, question of the patient. So the patient perspective is absolutely key to what we do. So the questions have to be meaningful, and the solutions we define have to make sure that the questions address, the solutions address the questions that are being identified, and make sure that the solutions are clinically meaningful to help develop better clinical trials, or also help us to understand disease progression in a better way. And the tools are developed within the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium by the CPAD Quantitative Medicine Program and in collaboration with the CPAD Data Collaboration Center. So those are cross-functional programs within the Critical Path Institute, which help in the generation of the solutions and also the most crucial aspects of data management. So once we get the patient-level data, they are cleaned, they're curated, standardized, and mapped and got ready for analysis, which is when the quantitative medicine program comes in. And we also have a quantitative modeling working group within the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, which focuses exclusively on the modeling aspects, modeling and analysis aspects. So going back in time for what has happened in the Alzheimer's Consortium, as you can see in this slide deck, so CMD was launched in 2008, and since then there have been multiple different successes and achievements taking place in the Alzheimer's disease consortium. So in 2011, the Alzheimer's disease serious standards were published, and then in between 2012 to 2020, we have had a series of different endorsements and qualifications from the EMA and the FDA for various clinical trial simulation tools, the hippocampal volume biomarkers, and also in terms of expanding our data sets to interact with other data sharing platforms like GAIN. And so the data sets that we acquire within the Alzheimer's disease consortiums are made publicly available for people to use, and we also interact with other data sharing platforms so that people can expand their research by looking at much more diverse data sets and a much more diverse patient population. So, and right now, the Alzheimer's Consortium has more than 20,000 patient-level data in our repository from more than 41 different clinical studies and observational studies. And these are all, once again, thanks to the generous contribution of the industry members. So we have got more than 40 studies, and this continues to expand and increase as we go. So in this year, we expect to get at least 6 to 7 additional data sets from high priority clinical trials that were done in the Alzheimer's disease space. And we expect to add close to 10 to 15,000 patient level records to our existing repository. So this is going to significantly expand our data repository, which means significantly expand the value and the robustness and the impact of our modeling and the quantitative solutions that we will generate. So to give you a brief overview of how we do what we do, so from the time the industry trials come into CPAD, which you can see on the left, so we get a series of trials, the data sets go through an extensive internal process of curation and standardization, as you can see in the middle box here. And these are all done in collaboration with the Data Collaboration Center. And also we do partner with external vendors who help with our anonymization and standardization processes. And once all of that process is done and once the data is curated, we put them all into an aggregated data set. So that's the final data set which is made available to the public, to the researchers, to qualified researchers for use. So all the data sets are put together, which we call the investigational database, which is then put up in a user-friendly, secure cloud interface, which other qualified researchers can use. But all those are also the same data sets with our quantitative medicine program uses to generate those actionable drug development solutions. And in the next slide, we can see a list of the data sets that we have acquired in the Alzheimer's Consortium over the last 10 years, I would say. And thanks to Diane's original CAMD vision, all of this started back then. So as you can see, we have received more than 40 different studies with more than 20,000 patient-level records. And at the bottom right, some of the new data sets that we have received from BTV Therapeutics and Takeda from the Tomorrow study. So these are all very high priority Alzheimer's disease clinical trials that were done. And all of these data sets are available for the public to use. And of course, the availability of the data set is driven by the data contribution agreements, but most of the data sets are available to the consortium and to qualified researchers. And this list continues to expand as we speak. So in Alzheimer's disease, there are a couple of key challenges among the many challenges in the space. And one of them is there's a pressing need for a better informed basis on which to design clinical trials in neuroscience, and particularly the early stages of the disease. And we know by now, thanks to the tremendous research work that's being done over the last 20 to 30 years, and also the extensive trials that have been done, we know that the Alzheimer's disease research and drug development has to be targeted to the earliest stages of the disease for better interventional opportunities and better outcomes. So what we do here is take those kinds of needs and unmet needs and priorities and realize that science is directing us to conduct trials in the earliest stages of the disease, and then use the patient level data to generate those solutions which will help us go as early as possible in the disease stage. So the information to do that is very limited right now because most of the trials have been done in the later stages of the disease, but the knowledge we gain from the patient level data will help us better design trials for the early stages of the disease. It will help us select the right patient populations, look at the right endpoints, or select the right biomarkers to look at in the early stages of the disease. And so that's the overall vision of the consortium, where we generate those novel drug development solutions spanning across the earliest to the latest stages of the disease, and which will provide an invaluable tool to optimize trial design and execution, and also reducing patient burden, but also reducing the cost and time for the industry members to conduct these trials. So the sooner we do those trials in the early stages of the disease, the better we get, and closer we get to a meaningful therapeutic intervention. So the Industry Data Sharing Initiative, as the name suggests, it was an initiative which was launched in 2018 within the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, with the primary goal of accomplishing a pre-competitive data sharing from prioritized clinical trials. And we say pre-competitive because the Critical Path Institute is neutral nonprofit organization and an entity, and we provide a safe space, so to speak, a pre-competitive space where all the industry members can come and work together by sharing data and by being part of the tools and solutions that we develop. So none of us are competing for the tools or the models or the solutions. We're competing for the molecules. So what the tools and solutions we generate can be used by anyone to advance their own individual goals and individual commercial opportunities and individual drug development research and research work. So this pre-competitive space, which facilitates a pre-competitive data sharing, will be a crucial aspect of all the tools and novel drug development solutions that we develop. So since the launch of this Industry Data Sharing Initiative, many different companies have committed to sharing data sets with CPAD, bringing more than 12,000 patient-level records to our database. And this slide shows you some of the prioritized AD trials that we identified a couple of years ago. And among these, at the top left, you can see that some of those companies have already shared the data with us. Some of them are in the process of signing the data contribution agreements, and following that, we will be receiving the data sets very soon. And then there is a list of studies at the bottom here where we have initiated contact and we have received support from these members in terms of the principle of data sharing. And these conversations will be ongoing, and once their internal regulatory milestones or internal milestones are met, the contributors will engage with us to start the process of data sharing and signing the data contribution agreements. And one of the key aspects I want to point out here is that all of these data sets contain both the treatment arms and the placebo arms. So, and they also have both baseline and longitudinal information in addition to extensive biomarker information. So basically, the data sets that CPAD gets, or the data sets we get within the Critical Path Institute, it's the full raw data sets from those prioritized AD trials. So, and these data sets are a rich source of information, all the way from clinical measures to imaging biomarkers, fluid biomarkers, and cognitive assessments, and also patient demographics, information on their phenotype. So it contributes to the heterogeneity of the data, but that is what we need for better understanding of disease progression and better stratification of patients in future trials. And in terms of the successes, we have also got data from studies which are not from an industry perspective, but also like the Diane observational study done by the Washington University. We have got data sets from those studies as well. And Lundbeck has shared data sets from 5 of their studies, which you can see on this table, in addition to the other trials and studies we have gotten access to through other platforms, which you can see at the bottom here. The A4 study, the AIBL, and the very high quality BioFinder study, which is still an ongoing study. And once again, all of this are coming with a rich source of information with different biomarkers and phenotype and genotype information. So the data sets that we get, we make it publicly available through our online data repository, which we call CODERS, the CPAD online data repository. And from the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, the 41 Alzheimer's disease studies with more than 20,000 patient-level records have been already accessed by more than 450 applicants from across the world, as you can see in this map. So our data sets are made available to qualified researchers for their use, and we don't define how they use them. We make it available for people to use it in the way they want to use it. And this is another key aspect of the principle of data sharing. So the purpose of data sharing is not just for us to generate novel tools and solutions from the Critical Path Institute, but also to facilitate researchers across the world to apply their own analysis, to generate their own solutions, because solutions and analysis can come from anywhere. And for a disease as complex as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, we need a collaborative approach. It's not going to be one solution. It's going to be a series of solutions put together for effective treatment and a successful therapeutic opportunity as we go forward. So our data sets are made publicly available, and they are being accessed from across the world, as you can see in this slide. So finally, I wanted to take a few slides to explain the concept of what we do, going back to the key word, which is the pre-competitive space and the pre-competitive data sharing. So right now, we all know that there are many different industries doing drug development and research and development in many different disease areas, but all of these are siloed within their own organizations, so which leads to siloed risks and costs, and also siloed data. No one shares the data with one another. But what CPAD aims to do, and CPAD, the Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, aims to do, is to remove the silos and provide a space, a pre-competitive space, a neutral space for integrated patient-level data, for open information exchange, knowledge transfer, and for quantitative analysis and modeling, and also scientific and regulatory leadership. As you know, CPAD works a lot with the FDA, and the FDA is one of our supporters and partners over the last 15 years. So this pre-competitive space also provides an avenue and a forum for the industry members to directly interact with the regulatory agencies to get their feedback and to share and discuss knowledge about, in a particular disease area in the early stages of development. And so the Critical Path Alzheimer's Consortium provides this pre-competitive neutral environment where all the members can come together so that there can be shared risks and costs, and we can share data, but ultimately resulting in shared success. So that's going to be the fundamental foundational aspects of what we do and upon which we will continue to work on. And all the industry members recognize this, and that's one of the reasons why we have all these members partner with us over the last decade, and they continue to support us as we go forward. And with increased data sharing in this neutral pre-competitive environment, and with increased knowledge transfer and information exchange, and also sharing the kinds of tools and solutions that we need to develop, it's going to help facilitate better trials, better trial designs going forward, and also better patient selection, and also understanding of disease progression in the Alzheimer's disease space. So with that, at this point, I will hand it over to Diane Stevenson, who's the Executive Director of the Critical Path for Alzheimer's Disease Consortium, where they've had tremendous successes with data sharing, and also they have a lot of initiatives where this data is already being used to develop novel solutions and accomplish those regulatory successes within the Parkinson's Disease Consortium. So I will hand it over to Diane to take us through what's been going on in the Parkinson's Consortium with much more examples of the value of data sharing as we go forward. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Diane Stevenson. Thank you so much to Sudhir. And it's really the path from the Alzheimer's Consortium that paved the way for what we're doing. I'm excited to share it with you today in the Critical Path for Parkinson's Consortium. This consortium was launched 5 years ago, and in the 5 years since we launched, we've made tremendous progress. So I'm excited to share this important disease area. As you may know, Parkinson's is actually the fastest growing brain disease, and there are many drugs in the pipeline, but many challenges exist. So I'm happy to tell you about today the successes we've had and continue to pave the path to helping improve the efficiencies by bringing data together. In the Parkinson's Consortium, we've successfully acquired and integrated data from over 12,000 subjects. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And that data, some of that data has been used to qualify the first imaging biomarker for Parkinson's, as well as we're now working to advance a drug disease trial model to optimize clinical trials in Parkinson's, targeting early stage patients. Really exciting is our digital drug development team, which is getting a lot of visibility now, so I'm excited to share that with you as well. We have many stakeholders, including industry, academic leaders from around the world, generous funding from Parkinson's UK, who is really responsible for launch of CPP. We even have people affected by Parkinson's working with us in our consortium, and 7 advocacy organizations. So incredibly rewarding to lead this important global effort. Next slide. So our goal is really to eliminate the barriers that occur when bringing drugs forward. And we target an early stage of the disease because for two reasons. One, there's a lot of data that's been collected over many years in unfortunate failed trials that target people soon after clinical diagnosis with the hope of halting disease progression. Secondly, because patients have reported that their dream therapy would be something that would halt disease progression very early when they could still work and enjoy their families and grandchildren. So this is an area where we strategically got together as a group in person in London at the launch of the consortium, wrote a paper about what we agreed together as a group of diverse stakeholders of how we can bring data together targeting this early stage of the disease. In the projects that we've all learned from, it's really important to be focused on what stage and target population, so you'll hear this theme throughout today. Next slide. So we've gathered together a lot of data. We started focusing on observational natural history studies to look at disease progression, once again, starting with this early patient population. And on the left, you see a list of observational cohorts that we've gathered and integrated together in a unified way to look at disease progression, not just from one study, but in fact, we have 5 observational cohorts of almost 5,000 subjects looking at disease progression. When we brought this data to the regulatory agencies, they asked us to go back and collect data, patient-level data from randomized controlled clinical trials. And when we learned that a couple of years ago, we've really made amazing progress at bringing together patient-level data from 13 clinical trials. And those are listed on the right. Some of these studies go back even 20 years or more. Remember, the disease itself hasn't changed. So some people have this perception that old clinical trials are not worthwhile, but they really are. And I'll share with you that in your program, please do consider studies, as recent and as long ago as possible, because all of us can learn from these important studies, particularly those that have failed to reach approval. Next slide. So what have we done with the data we've collected to date? Usually at Critical Path Institute, we wait until we get a regulatory success to announce what we've achieved. But in the Parkinson's Consortium, even early days, we wanted to make the most use out of the data we had. So of 2 of all the studies I showed you were used to actually endorse the first ever imaging biomarker for use in Parkinson's trials targeting early stage disease. And this was somewhat novel, even though the imaging biomarker itself wasn't novel, but the idea that really when you enroll people in a trial, you need to make sure that they have the neuroimaging pathologic profile that's consistent with Parkinson's. And we brought the data to the regulatory agencies, we've published this work, and we have some great successes around now making sure that when subjects are enrolled in the trials, that they really do have this profile to show that they have dopamine deficit, which is consistent with the diagnosis of Parkinson's. The other story I'll tell you about is in genetically defined subjects, so I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But the message to tell you here today is that the sooner you get data in, it's already start to turn the crank and find out how this data will help inform the future. So don't hesitate to dive in and start working on the data right away. Next slide. The genetically defined story is pretty interesting. When I was in industry before I came to Critical Path Institute, gene-based therapeutic targets became the hot topic, and they still are today. But it was actually presumed or assumed in industry that if you had a genetically defined target, that you could do an early, easier proof of concept trial because you could show that those genetically defined patients would progress theoretically faster. But what we showed in our database, in fact, was that there was an unexpected reduced rate of disease progression in people that carry this LRRK2 mutation. This mutation is not 100% really common in Parkinson's, but it is one of the most common gene risk factors. And again, this is incredibly important. It was showed in another study, but we were looking at rate of progression both on motor features and now in a paper under review on non-motor features, showing in both cases the rate of disease progression with this genetic mutation is actually slower. So for those companies that are pursuing drugs that target this gene, LRRK2 inhibitors, if they were to assume that that their trials should recruit fewer patients, they definitely wouldn't be successful. This is the kind of thing that we really want to encourage around using data to help plan and optimize new studies as we bring forward these promising targets in the future. Next slide. So the other message to share with all of you is that all studies are incredibly valuable to learn from. And, you know, the NIH, the government, sponsors incredibly valuable studies that are high cost, high risk, but the two most recent successes that we've had in our CPP consortium came from 2 repurposed drug trials that unfortunately failed to reach their primary efficacy endpoints. So if we didn't get involved, you know, these studies kind of just go and hide in hiding, and no one really can learn from them because the drug wasn't approved. But thanks to a lot of hard work from incredible people, the principal investigators themselves, the NIH, the patient level data from these 2 studies was aggressively and eagerly shared with CPP. This is an incredible story because usually when trials read out, especially if they're negative, you have to wait and wait and wait and hope that you can get the data. But in this case, the PIs themselves worked really hard with us, with the NIH and others at Rochester, to get this data to us. In fact, this is one of the first examples we have at Critical Path in which the data was shared with CPAth before the publications came out. So this is an incredible success story. I'm sharing this with all of you today because in your area that you work in, any study is really important to learn from, and the NIH and these government-sponsored studies, it's incredibly important to learn from these studies to make sure to maximize how these studies can teach us about optimizing the chance for success in the future. So this is a great milestone, and I want to share it with you today because, please, we want all studies to be shared as soon as possible to maximize their use. Next slide. So the future vision for all the drugs, all the diseases we work on, you know, in the nervous system, we have this gold hope dream that we'll have drugs that are able to target the disease before onset of symptoms. We know from promising biomarkers and genetics that these diseases start many, many years prior to onset of clinical manifestations. And the vision and hope in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and all of these disease areas is that we can treat as early as possible. How are we going to do that? Well, it turns out, as you likely know, that all the data that exists primarily comes from data from people in the manifest stage of the disease. But thanks to emerging, exciting advances in biomarkers and genetics, we're paving the path to understanding how to generate and get data as early as possible in at-risk individuals, with a vision and hope that we can treat in pre-symptomatic patients to reduce and prevent disease onset in these very devastating diseases. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. There's a little bit more I wanted to tell you is this digital project. So last slide, I think. Oh, I won't be telling you that story today, but please don't hesitate to contact me. We have a very exciting project advancing digital drug development tools with digital sensor data. This is very promising in Parkinson's and has a lot of potential across diseases. So the summary is that data sharing is critical to advancing all of our goals, our collective goals, to accelerate drug development across diseases of unmet need. We have this unique platform as a neutral third party to bring in data. We have the legal, regulatory, and infrastructure to bring this data forward in formal ways. And we have a lot to learn from you because thanks to Kanwaljit and your leadership, it's very exciting to hear about your award to advance real-world evidence and real-world data for neonates. So thanks so much for your attention. I'd be happy to be contacted at any time in the future to help you as you pave your path forward.
Whatever you and Diane have accomplished is truly amazing in association with quantitative medicine. And I agree that we hope to replicate exactly that when we start our INC's data sharing initiative. So thank you so very much for your presentation. Up next, we have the panel presentation. And the purpose of this panel presentation is to allow some of the people who have not presented so far to present, to give a little bit of their perspectives of data sharing. And on the panel, we have Satoshi Kusuda from Japan, Laura Fabry from KIZ, Mark Turner from University of Liverpool, Roger Sol from Vermont Oxford Network, and Susan McCune from FDA. The very first, I'm going to start with Satoshi Kusuda from Kyorin University in Japan, and he's going to present his perspectives of data sharing as far as the available data, neonatal data in Japan. Could you please unmute him?
Okay, thank you, Kamarjit. So
yes,
hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Can I have my slide? Oh, okay.
It's all there.
Okay, so I'm Satoshi Kusuda from Tokyo, Japan. I'm a neonatologist. I'm very honored to have such a valuable opportunity today. Time is limited, so you can hear me. So I'd like to start my comment immediately. I'd like to explain how Japan can contribute to this real-world data project. Currently, there are 3 sources of data in Japan that could be useful for the project. The first one is our network database for very low birth weight infants. This database has been collected since 2003, and more than 70,000 infants have already been registered. In addition, this database is linked to the follow-up outcomes at 1.5, 3, and 6 years of age. So it is possible to analyze the long-term outcomes among very low birth weight infants. So this is very valuable data source for real-world data. The second one is laboratory values stored at hospitals. However, at this moment, these data need to be extracted manually. However, some hospital has already expressed to be able to join the project. The last data source is very unique for Japan. It's so-called DPC, Diagnosis Procedure Combinations, which is essentially a system for paying medical fees for hospitalization. Therefore, it includes primary and secondary diagnosis, and also usage of all medication, and data for all procedures, including surgery. However, again, this data also needs to be retrospectively extracted. So we have 3 different sources to contribute to the real-world data project. So we believe contribution from Japan is very huge. So there are possibility that these data sources can contribute to the real-world data project greatly from Japan. So thank you. So hand over to Kamarjit.
Thank you, Satoshi. We are truly honored to have you on board, and we would love to collaborate with you. And I think absolutely the data that you have is really great, and we would love to have access to your data and incorporate into the overall database that we're making. The next person on the panel is Laura Fabry from KIZ, and I would like for Laura to come in and present brief remarks as far as her company's real-world data sharing activities are concerned. Mute.
You? Okay, now is on mute. Hi all. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi all. I am Laura Fabry, head of clinical and neonatology in KIZ Pharmaceuticals. I have been playing this role for 15 years, being the responsible of many clinical studies in neonatology, most on surfactants in respiratory distress syndrome. Currently, we are also developing a sublingual buprenorphine for neonatal abstinence syndrome. Our databases will be yours in this project according to next specific agreements, principally to save the subject's confidentiality. Important to report here, finally, how relevant the real-world evidence area is becoming in Chiesi for future clinical research. We had built a driving mission vision by 2025. Just a phrase from it to give you an idea. Real-world evidence as one integrated voice will be part of Chiesi's culture and expertise and will be embedded in our portfolio strategy, product development, and life cycle management. And so eventually, we would like in near future to be recognized as a trusted partner also for you, for some of you, our external stakeholders. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura. We are very happy to collaborate with you, and we are so glad that you consider that the data that you have could be made available to CPAD for analysis. Susan, we cannot hear you. So I'm going to go right ahead to Mark Turner. Dr. Turner is our Inc.'s academic director, UK academic director, and he's from University of Liverpool. And I'm actually going to have Dr. Turner come on board and provide perspectives about European data and the perspectives of European data for our project. Dr. Turner, can you hear me?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Great, well, thank you very much. Thank you to the whole Critical Path team for this opportunity to work together and advance the causes that are so close to all our hearts. In Europe, there are several databases that would be interested in contributing to this work. I draw your attention to the e-newborn group, which includes 300 neonatal units from across 10 countries and is building on the 14-year record of data collection in the UK and in many other countries. We're developing we have a 450 variable data set that is real-world information, and we can adapt and expand that in the light of needs for information. The other group that are very keen to join this work are the neonatal arm of the Global Antibiotics Research and Development Partnership, GARD-DP, and they've worked on a number of antimicrobial trials and a large-scale global observational study of neonatal infection and neonatal sepsis. And so they're very keen to pool their lab data and hopefully infection data when we come to think more generally. So I'm sure we can find other groups once we've identified the way the group's going to work, and once we have good ways to bring databases on board in a way that put everyone's interests together. And I see this as having a very valuable direct benefit through data, but I see this also as underpinning interoperable networks in the way that Colin spoke about for IACT and ourselves for C4C, so that this will build up a whole range of collaborations that will be useful with real-world evidence, but also in the conduct and dissemination of research. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. Next, I have Roger Soule, who is from Vermont Oxford Network, and Dr. Soule has been collaborating with Inc. for a long time. I would like for Dr. Soule to come up and provide his perspectives about these data sharing programs.
The U.S. press. So I represent Vermont Oxford Network, a collaboration of over 1,000 neonatal units worldwide. And of course, we are very interested in how real-world data gets processed to improve newborn care. The Vermont Oxford Network right now involves specific standard definitions, but hand data extraction. And that's not going to cut it in the 21st century. And so my interest in this participation is how we are going to create platforms that can take real-world data and transform it into usable data for both quality and research. And Vaughn is extremely interested in this and perhaps represents the largest group of hospitals that can work towards this end. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. So. Pleasure to have you on board, and we would be more than happy to. I am unable to hear her. So I think I'm just going to jump over directly to the QA session. We do have quite a few QAs, question and answers that have come in. And on the panel for the QA, we have Laura Fabry from Kaiser, Colin Hovinga from IACT, and I think he will be covered by Thomas Miller from Bayer, because Colin has been having some audio issues. We also have Satoshi. Hopefully Susan will have her audio fixed. We have Klaus Romero, Roger Soul, Diane Stephenson, and Mark Turner. So there are several questions that have been presented to us. And my first question is for Diane and for Klaus. And question has been that in CPAD's experience, what has been the largest challenge to data sharing, these kind of data sharing initiatives are? Diane? Diane, if you're on mute, please unmute yourself.
Okay, all right, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yes, great question. So that's a difficult question to answer, but I will say that data sharing is defined differently by different people. If I were to have started over, I would say to bring the patient voice, the patient community, obviously in your case, the parent voice would be really key early on. I would say that people really want to embrace open science, but it's incredibly challenging, and it's not a simple solution by signing a legal document. It involves building relationships and trust, and that's what's so exciting for me to join this meeting today, because I'm just amazed at the number of experts that we have involved in this initiative that are already willing to step up and share data. So you really need to work together, show those examples, and try to identify where the risks are. Because I would say in the most cases, and I spent my career in industry, a lot of it is perceived risk as opposed to real risk. And at CPAD, we have so much data that we've brought together over many, many years with really no risk of liability or breach or concern for any secure reason. So I would say continue to work together, bring the patient voice in, and do this as collaboratively as possible, and try not to come up with all the barriers, because they are really perceived risks. That's my own views.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, I think that is certainly true. Working collaboratively is the only solution, and a bit of understanding that, you know, when we are sharing this data, this actually benefits everyone, and not just the people who are sharing the data, but also the patients for whom this entire initiative is going to be geared towards. The next question is from Vaisha Bhatt Mehta from University of Michigan, and that is for Klaus. And her question is that real world data is often very messy, especially in terms of things like medication administration, for example. Do we have a specific plan in order to validate the accuracy of such data collected? She also said that there are many other data with similar issues that one could ask the same questions of.
It sounds like Klaus is having a hard time. Kanwaljit,
yeah,
maybe I'll just comment that in our CPP consortium, we're trying to improve how to capture medication use. It's incredibly difficult. Every study, cohort, and clinical trial has different rules of how they capture medications, and medications have a huge impact on Parkinson's patients. So we're actually coming up with recommendations for go-forward solutions on how prospective studies should collect medications in the future. And getting behind this up front is so important, because every consortium we have has issues with medications, as just one of the examples you raised.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Diane. Then there has been a question about data privacy concerns, especially when it comes to pediatric populations. I believe that, Diane, your data sharing activities, while they did not involve pediatric population, but data privacy concerns are basically the same, no matter what age of patients I'm talking about. And in your experience, how did you handle this type of data privacy concerns, especially things like having to get access, permission from the patients whose data is being collected from, and did you have like prior past issues in terms of going back to patients' consent forms, for example, whether they allowed their data to be shared for different purposes or another purpose
Right.
than the original? Yeah.
Yep, so this topic comes up front and center almost every time we go out to request data. Under the CPAD Data Collaboration Center, the data that comes into CPAD is de-identified, but as you know, the regulations for how to define de-identified data is changing rapidly. And in the project we're leading now on the digital health technologies front, this is an incredibly important topic. I will say this is again an example where bringing in the patient voice early is so key. Again, in your case, in the parent voice, but in the majority of cases, we're learning that patients who want to go into trials to utilize smartphone devices, for example, really are eager to consent upfront of how that data can be used, not only for that study, but to help advance the field. The privacy concerns are important, right? Things like position, genetic status, all those things are critical. But I feel confident that by getting these things up front and center, and at CPAD, we are fully compliant with all security regulations, both in the US and in Europe, even though they're evolving. But these are issues that can be addressed very readily up front.
Thank you, Diane. Great answer. Now I have a question for Thomas Miller. I believe he's on the phone. And Tom, I hope you can hear me. The question is, because you deal directly with the data that is coming directly from patients, and the question has been that what level of control do data contributors have regarding the accessibility of their data?
Yeah, can you hear me, Kamaljeet?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so and maybe following up on Diana's thoughts, we do have an obligation to review patient level data for our studies for the intended purpose that the data is collected for, and that is very typical for all sponsored and non-sponsored studies. However, I think the key aspects for us on the sponsor side is back to the earlier comment, understanding what was agreed to when consent was initially applied in the context of the study. Some of the studies that I've been thinking about for this initiative, we conduct multinational studies across several countries around the world, and there may be local differences in regulation and expectations with respect to consent process. And as Dan mentioned, there are certainly different obligations in different geographies around the world with respect to data privacy initiatives. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't move these initiatives forward. We can, and I have found success in this regard previously. But I think we need to understand that that this is a process that will take time, and it will involve multiple constituents inside the walls of the company. And in addition to real world data groups, I suspect many of my industry colleagues on the phone also have clinical trial transparency organizations within each of their companies, and these groups are really the arbiters, at least in the bear model, in how we move forward with evaluation of data in a way that is protective and fulfills the obligations in the consent form that we as sponsors made to participating patients, and is respectful of all of the local jurisdiction rules that we have to follow with respect to data privacy.
Thanks, Tom. Then I have a couple more questions. One is I have had from Robert Watt. And the question that he had is, are providers of electronic health records to U.S. hospitals willing to facilitate data to be shared into a common database? And I think this is a question that I have for Klaus. Klaus, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you repeat the question? You broke up there a little bit when you asked the question.
So the question is, are providers of electronic health records in the U.S. hospitals, are they willing to facilitate data sharing into a common database for CPAD?
Oh, right.
So basically, he's asking the willingness of the hospitals.
Yep, Bruno, that's a great question. The list that I showed in the slide that I presented that represents the partners that are willing to share data with us is the starting point. So those are the hospitals and the collaborators that are willing to initiate the data integration effort. Does that mean that every single other hospital with a NICU is going to be in the same boat? The answer is not in the beginning. And so as we started taking the journey, as you heard from Sudhir and Diane, of integrating data from companies even, not all companies were on the same boat with their willingness to share data about 10 years ago. But as we started integrating the data from the companies that were willing to share the data, and those companies started getting their PR opportunities to shine as data sharing pioneers, that put things in perspective for the companies that were not in the same level of willingness. And that really helped transform the conversation. And so that's how things worked for industry data sets. Now, with academic observational studies across the diseases that we have integrated data for, the journey has been very similar. Some are more willing to share, others not so much. We, of course, start with the ones that are willing to share, and that helps put things into perspective, and that helps kind of plow the field for the late adopters to then come on board. And we expect the same phenomenon to manifest itself for electronic health records from hospitals. We want to start with the ones that have the vision and the willingness to share the data, and that's going to then help put things in perspective for the rest of the community, and hopefully entice them to come on board even as late adopters. So there is always a distribution in that sense. So I hope that answered the question. I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Klaus. Yes, it does. And I think this is a similar question that I have from Colin also, because a lot of data from hospitals is actually going to be brokered through Colin Hovinga from IAC, because they have these contracts with their 30 or 40 hospitals. Colin, do you have any comments? I do have one last question from Ronald Iriago from Stanford University. Do EMR sources need to be specifically organized for this collaboration? And this is a question again that I have for Klaus. Klaus?
Yes, another really important question. So if the mantra has always been that analogous to the pyramid of evidence, so to speak, there is this pyramid of how structured data are. And at the top, there's the clinical trial data sets from industry that are intended to be presented to a regulatory body in terms of how organized those data need to be. Then underneath there are, and that even carries a wide distribution, the observational studies from academia. Then underneath that, patient registries, either the patient registries that are controlled by the patients themselves, or the clinical patient registries that researchers run in specific hospital settings. And then underneath that come the electronic health record data, and then underneath that, the claims databases. That is a perception, but even then, even the data sets coming in from industry, from randomized clinical trial data sources, those still need to be remapped, managed, curated. And with patient registries and observational studies, the story is exactly the same. So we expect to have to do that with the electronic health record data that we're going to be presented with. Of course, with the added challenge of the nature, the underlying nature of those data. That is why, as part of the data and analytics platform that is being proposed for this effort, we want to keep the flexibility of keeping things integrated in a data lake level, so that we can keep things organized in a way that is helpful, but doesn't get in the way of being able to integrate the data. But from there, you can, and the vision is that from a data lake, you can turn the data into more of a data warehouse where things will be very well structured, because those are the kinds of data sets that if we are to present any of the solutions that are being envisioned for drug development for a formal review and potential endorsement through any mechanism that exists for the review and endorsement of drug development tools, both at the FDA and the EMA, we need to have the data structured in a very specific way. So it is going to be a journey from just looking at the metadata first and then the first pass of the patient level data that exists in the electronic health records, all the way to getting the data integrated first into a data lake construct, then into a data warehouse construct, and then being able to transform those data into the solutions that we're envisioning. And that is why the agency is so keen on that data diagnosis exercise in the beginning, so that we determine how we can improve the information value of electronic health records as real-world data sources for specific regulatory science applications. So I hope that answered the question. I'll stop with that one more time.
Yes, it does, Klaus. Thank you so much. I have one question for Dr. Mark Turner, because we are planning to incorporate data from multiple different geographical sources, and I assume that there are specific challenges when you're talking about getting data out of places such as UK or European Union. Dr. Turner, do you have any comments? And after that, I'll also have the same question from Laura Fabry.
Well, the UK is a free agent, isn't it? So we may have a different situation in this very small part of Europe. But I think there are two general approaches to that. One is to keep the data anonymized completely, and the other sort of data sets that are hosted within the coverage of the GDPR. And then the other approach is to use a truly federated data set where the information doesn't leave the GDPR area, but is federated and the queries are formed from that. And I'm sure CPAD has plenty of experience in the different models. I've heard that they have a database hosted in the UK, which can then be a safe way to move data or to query data in similar ways across multiple jurisdictions. But like everything else, it's going to be a journey. Let's take one step at a time. Let's have the right expectations. And then I'm sure we will be able to pull data. Other people have done it. CPAD have done it. So I look forward to the progress.
Thanks, Dr. Turner. And similarly, I have the same question for Laura Fabry too, because as an Italian corporation, I think she might have some unique perspectives about that.
Yes, I join what Mark Turner said, because also for us, okay, we are located in Italy, but certainly most of our trials are international. So we record the data from different countries, and certainly we have a specific legal colleagues that will help us to share with data according to the legislation, respecting, of course, the GDPR. certainly is a part of this project to be very carefully managed, and will be part of our next agreements, because certainly is a point of attention in a company, the confidentiality of the data. And I do not know if I have captured well the question.
No, I think that was perfect. This is exactly what my question to you was. So the fact that you, as you said, that most of your data is international, yeah, I think that helps a lot.
Yes, they are all international.
Yes, thank you, Laura. So I see that Susan McCune has finally come. It's a pleasure to have you on board, and we do look forward to collaborating with you. And I see Susan McCune from FDA is finally on the platform. And Susan, if you can hear me, I would love to have hear FDA perspectives because
Kanwaljit, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Lovely. Okay, so we've tried multiple options, and I apologize. That was on my side. The FDA VPN kind of popped back on, and that was on me. I thought I could use the phone, but for right now, I just want to take a couple of seconds. Thank you for the kind introduction. As most of you know, I'm a neonatologist. I think it's been a great conversation, and it's exciting that the INC grant will be able to leverage all of the fabulous data-based activities that CPAD has undertaken in the past. I want to talk just a couple of minutes about what FDA has been doing in the real-world data, real-world evidence space. First, just a couple of definitions. That real-world data are the data related to patient health status and/or the delivery of healthcare routinely collected from a variety of sources. And real-world data can come from, as you know, a number of sources, including electronic health records, claims and billing activities, product and disease registries, patient-generated data, including home use settings, and data gathered from other sources that inform on health status, like mobile devices. The difference is that real-world evidence is the clinical evidence regarding the usage and potential benefits or risks of a medical product derived from the analysis of real-world data. So real-world evidence can be generated by different study designs or analyses, including but not limited to randomized trials, large simple trials, pragmatic trials, and observational studies. In this space, I just wanted to share, and we can give these links out, that FDA started having this conversation very early on with a New England Journal article that was published in 2016 by the center directors and the commissioner at the time. The New England Journal article was called Real World Evidence, What It Is and What It Can Tell Us. And basically, this was a seminal article really talking about how to be able to use the real-world evidence that's gained from clinical trials, as well as EHR's registries in those claim databases that I talked about. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but just to know that in 2018, there was a JAMA article written by the Office of Medical Policy and Dr. Woodcock on real-world evidence and real-world data for evaluating drug safety and effectiveness that really talked about the fact that the FDA routinely uses real-world data to provide evidence about drug safety, drawing on claims and pharmacy data from more than 100 million individuals in the Sentinel system. And that in addition, that FDA regulations have long recognized that historical controls taken from practice settings can be used as reference groups in single intervention group treatment studies that provide substantial evidence of effectiveness. For example, when the course of the disease is predictable, for example, certain rare diseases and cancers. One example of that was the use of data extracted from patient records for approval of a monoclonal antibody for Philadelphia chromosome negative relapsed and refractory B-cell precursor ALL. In addition, FDA has been trying to look at use of real-world data in real-world settings, known as the IMPACT or AFib trial, looking at testing and educational intervention. I just want to say that the FDA real-world evidence framework was published in December of 2018, and the article summarizes the evidence program to support new indications for drugs that are already approved or to help support or satisfy post-approval study requirements, but doesn't preclude the possibility of using real-world evidence when feasible in pre-market development, and an example of that was the approval of Brineura, serliponase alpha, which is for neuronal steroid lipofuscinosis type 2, where there were data on untreated patients from a natural history cohort compared to data on treated patients. Also, increased or update of a label for the herpes zoster vaccine based on long-term effectiveness generated by a prospective observational trial, and then additional data that will support mutations of cystic fibrosis approval and labeling data based on prospectively obtaining data from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation patient registry. So in summary, I apologize really fast and I spoke too much, but this is a really exciting opportunity to share data on neonates. We have to think about the sources of the data and standardizing the terminology, which we've been hearing about today. We hope these data will be able to be used to assess safety, to generate hypotheses for testing in randomized controlled trials, to assess trial feasibility by examining the impact of planned inclusion-exclusion criteria in the relevant population, or to identify prognostic indicators or patient baseline characteristics for enrichment or stratification in trials. And I think John Davis really talked a lot about this with respect to the BPD questions that we have. So I think the focus on enrichment in trials is critically important based on the heterogeneity in our population, and I really look forward to the collaboration in moving this forward. Thank you so much, and sorry that I had so many technical issues.
No worries at all, Dr. McCune. We are honored for you to be here, and we're so glad that these tech issues were resolved and we were finally able to hear your comments about and your perspectives and FDA perspectives about these data sharing initiatives, especially with respect to real-world data and real-world evidence. Klaus, do you, as the PI of this grant, do you have any comments about this, about what Dr. McCune said? I think you might have dropped off. Anyways, okay, I think there is one more question that has come in from Mary Short, that can recommendations from these efforts be shared with EMR vendors to improve data collection. Will EMR vendors be stakeholders and participants in this effort? And I believe Colin, who is going to be working very closely with us from IET, he's going to be interacting with a lot of these hospitals from where the EMR data is going to come from. So I'm going to let Colin answer this question, if he can hear me. Colin?
Yes. Yes, our plan is to work with both Epic and Cerner. I didn't share the results on our survey, but we mapped out which EHR systems our institutions used with the hope of developing a more efficient platform for being able to transfer information.
Okay, excellent. And then the other question was that can recommendations from these efforts be shared with the EMR vendors to improve data collection? To my understanding, yes, we certainly will be sharing recommendations from these efforts with all of the EMR vendors who we are going to work with, and happy to share with those who we are not working with also. But one of the primary aims of this grant is to really inform and and find gaps in the data collection efforts from the various EMR sources, and whatever gaps that we find and we determine from our data analysis, we will be communicating back to our data share contributors and making recommendations that what would be the best way to store data in the future. Okay, so I think we are a little bit over the time. We do have a couple of unanswered questions, but I'm more than happy to take those questions offline and get back to you guys offline and send emails with the answers to those questions. But since we are already over the time, I think we're going to go directly to the break. And we will be joining back here in about 40 minutes at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And the next topic on the agenda is going to be treatments administered to the pregnant women for the benefits of neonates.